You are there, in the choking dust of Mesopotamia, in the year 363. The air is thick with the scent of iron, sweat, and fear. The Roman legions, the inheritors of 1,000 years of martial glory, are in retreat. The Sasanian cataphracts, gleaming spectres of steel, harry their flanks, and the air hums with the lethal whisper of Persian arrows. At the centre of this maelstrom of desperation is the emperor, Flavius Claudius Julianus. He is not in the rear, guarded by a wall of praetorians. He is at the front, a flash of imperial purple amidst the bronze and leather. His presence a force against the encroaching panic. He is the Philosopher-King, the last hope for a world teetering on the edge of a new, strange faith he cannot comprehend. Then you see it. A flicker of motion from the side. A thrown spear, loosed not by a noble Sasanian warrior, but perhaps by a Saracen auxiliary, a mercenary fighting for coin. It arcs through the heavy air. There is no time for a shield to be raised, no time for a shouted warning to reach its target. The spear strikes home, punching through the thin armor below his arm, a brutal, piercing violation. A collective gasp runs through the ranks. Men who have faced down death 100 times freeze in horror. The emperor falters, a look of shocked surprise on his face. He slumps in his saddle, the spear shaft a grotesque protrusion from his side. This is where our story ends. This is the moment history records as the death of the last pagan emperor, the final tragic gasp of the old gods. A field surgeon's desperate work, a feverish night of pain, and a final, whispered lament. Vicisti, Galilei, you have won, Galilean. But what if you didn't? Feel the shock of the impact, the searing agony. But instead of puncturing the liver, a fatal blow, the spearhead glances off a rib. It tears through muscle and sinew. A grievous, agonizing wound, but not a mortal one. Julian is pulled from his horse, his lifeblood staining the Mesopotamian dust. But the physicians who rush to his side find not a dying man, but a wounded one. The whispers begin, first among the guards, then spreading like fire through the terrified army. He is not dead. The emperor lives. The retreat becomes something else. It is no longer the flight of a leaderless mob. It is a fighting withdrawal, a grim, bloody-minded slog to protect a sacred vessel. Every legionary becomes a guardian. They form a shield wall around the tent where Julian lies, his breath ragged, his body burning with fever. For days, the fate of the world hangs in the balance. The Christians in the army pray, perhaps with conflicted hearts, for the life of their pagan emperor. The pagans make desperate, silent vows to Mithras, to Sol Invictus, to the old Capitoline triad. They offer libations of precious water onto the thirsty ground, and their prayers are answered. The fever breaks. One morning, Julian awakens, his mind clear. The fire in his veins receded to a dull, throbbing ache. He sees the faces of his generals, men like Jovian and Valentinian, etched with a relief so profound it is almost a form of pain. But as Julian looks at them, he feels something has irrevocably changed within him. The man who marched into Persia was a philosopher, an idealist who believed he could persuade the world back to reason, back to the beauty of the Hellenic gods, through rhetoric and example. The man who awakens in this blood-soaked tent is someone harder, colder, forged anew in the crucible of near death. He sees his survival not as a lucky chance, not as a quirk of anatomy, but as a sign, a divine intervention. The gods themselves, he believes, reached down and deflected the spear. They saved him for a purpose. They tested his resolve, and he did not break. His mission is no longer simply a policy. It is a sacred mandate. The quiet tolerance, the subtle marginalization of the Christian faith it is not enough. The Galilean superstition is a disease, a cancer upon the soul of the empire, and it requires not gentle treatment, but the surgeon's knife. The news of his survival races ahead of the returning army. In Antioch, in Alexandria, in Rome itself, the reports had been of his death. Christian bishops had begun to compose sermons of triumph, seeing God's judgment in the fatal spear. Pagan philosophers had prepared to retreat into the shadows once more. Then the second wave of messengers arrives. Their horses lathered, their voices hoarse with the incredible truth. The emperor is alive. He is victorious, having forced a treaty from the Persians in the wake of their failed attempt to shatter his army. He is returning. You can feel the tremor that runs through the empire. It is a seismic shockwave of hope and terror. When he finally arrives in Constantinople months later, it is not the entrance of a defeated man limping home. It is a triumph. The limp is there, a permanent reminder of his ordeal, but he carries it like a badge of honor. The city, a Christian capital for a generation, is uncertain how to greet him. The crowds that line the Mies, the great central avenue, are a study in contrasts. You see old senators, men from families who trace their lineage back to the Republic, openly weeping with joy. They throw laurel leaves before his horse, their faces shining with the hope of a world restored. You see Neoplatonist philosophers from the academy, once silenced, now standing tall, their eyes bright with intellectual fervor. But for every one of them, you see a dozen others whose faces are clouded with apprehension. The merchants, the artisans, the common folk of the city, many of whom have known no God but Christ, watch in sullen silence. They see the legions marching not under the labarum, the Chiro standard of Constantine, but under the ancient Aquila, the eagle of Jupiter. They see soldiers bearing shields emblazoned with the radiant sun of Sol Invictus. The air, usually filled with the chanting of psalms from the city's many churches, is instead punctuated by the unfamiliar, martial blast of the Roman tuba and the harsh clash of gladius on scutum. The climax of the procession is not at the Hagia Sophia or the Church of the Holy Apostles. Julian, leaning on a cane but with his back ramrod straight, stops before a small, almost forgotten temple to the genius of the city, which his agents had worked frantically to reconsecrate. In the stunned silence of the assembled thousands, a bull, its horns gilded, is led to a hastily constructed altar. Julian takes the ceremonial knife himself. He is no longer just emperor. He is Pontifex Maximus in truth, not just in title. The knife flashes. The bull falls. The blood, dark and steaming, pools on the marble. A collective shudder runs through the crowd. This is not a political statement. This is a declaration. It is an act of ritual warfare. The smoke from the burnt offering rises into the Byzantine sky, a fragrant pagan plume that challenges the heavens. For the Christians, it is the ultimate blasphemy, an abomination performed in the heart of their sacred city. For the pagans, it is the scent of rebirth, the first true breath the old world has taken in 60 years. Later that night you stand unseen in the great palace. The halls echo with the unfamiliar sounds of hymns to Apollo and philosophical debates. The soft glow of candlelight illuminates Julian at his desk. He is writing, not philosophy, but law. His face is a mask of grim determination. The pain in his side is a constant, faithful companion, a reminder of his purpose. He has seen the fragility of his own life, the fragility of his entire project. He now knows he does not have the luxury of time. The decades he once thought he would have to gently coax the empire back to its ancestral path. He has won his great victory against the foreign foe. He has survived the assassin's spear. He has been given a second chance, a gift from the gods. He holds the chalice of his miraculous survival, a cup overflowing with political capital, military authority, and divine purpose. He raises it to his lips, ready to drink deep, to use its power to save the world he loves. What he cannot see, what no one can see, is that the chalice is poisoned. The very victory that empowers him, the survival that sanctifies his mission, is the ingredient that will curdle the soul of the empire, plunging it into a darkness far deeper than any he could ever imagine. The war with Persia is over. The war for the soul of Rome is about to begin. The smoke from the sacrifice has long since cleared, but a new atmosphere hangs over Constantinople, as heavy and oppressive as the summer humidity. It is an atmosphere of waiting. For 3 weeks, the emperor remains in the palace, consulting not with his generals, but with a strange new court of pale philosophers and robed mystics men like Maximus of Ephesus, who is rumoured to command spirits. The Christian senators and administrators find themselves excluded, their requests for audiences politely but firmly denied. The city holds its breath, waiting for the other sandal to drop. Then, on a market day in the Forum of Constantine, it drops. You are there, amidst the throng of merchants haggling over the price of Egyptian wheat and Anatolian wool. A cohort of the palace guard, their helmets plumed, their armour gleaming, clears a space at the base of the great porphyry column, where the statue of Apollo, repurposed as Constantine, looks out over his city. A herald, his voice amplified by the acoustics of the surrounding porticos, unrolls a heavy scroll sealed with the imperial purple wax. Silence falls. A sudden, expectant hush. The herald begins to read. His voice is the voice of the state, cold, impersonal, and absolute. He announces the Edictum Puritatis, the Edict of Purity. It is not a single decree, but a cascade of them, a complete re-architecting of the soul of the Roman world. First, the establishment of a new state religion. The old ways, the herald proclaims, are not a collection of disconnected cults, but a single, universal Hellenic faith. To lead it, the emperor, in his role as Pontifex Maximus, is creating a new hierarchy. Each province will have a high priest, a pontifex, appointed by Julian himself, responsible for the moral conduct and philosophical education of the local priesthood. These are to be men of unimpeachable character, learned in Plato and Porphyry, dedicated to charity and piety. You see an old senator, a member of a family that secretly kept the rights of Jupiter alive, clutch the arm of his son, his eyes filled with tears. For him, this is not innovation, it is restoration. But where will the money for this grand new structure come from? The herald's next words send a jolt of ice through the Christian majority in the crowd. All state subsidies to the Galilean Church, instituted by Constantine and his sons, are terminated, effective immediately. All church properties built on land once belonging to a temple are to be reviewed by a new magistracy. All wealth and endowments bequeathed to the church for the specific purpose of charity are to be redirected to the new Hellenic pontificate to establish its own orphanages and food distributions. It is a stunning blow, a fiscal decapitation. Julian is not just defunding his rival, he is seizing their most popular function, co-opting the Christian virtue of charity for his own faith. Then comes the part of the edict that cuts deepest, the part that will be remembered and cursed for centuries. It concerns education. The emperor, the herald intones, believes it is a moral absurdity for a man to teach the tales of Homer if he does not revere the gods of Olympus. It is hypocrisy to lecture on the virtues of Scipio while denigrating the rites Scipio practiced. Therefore, all Galileans are henceforth barred from teaching the classical curriculum, literature, rhetoric, and philosophy. They may teach their own gospels and epistles in their own schools, but the cultural inheritance of Greece and Rome is now forbidden to them as a profession. You watch the face of a young student standing beside his teacher, a famed Christian rhetorician. The student's face twists in confusion. His teacher has made Virgil sing for him, made Cicero's prose a living thing. Now, that man is to be silenced. A wedge has been driven between them. The edict creates a terrible choice for every ambitious Christian family. Give your son a secular, pagan education and a future in the Roman state, or a Christian one and a future as a pariah. It is a quiet, bloodless, and utterly brilliant act of cultural warfare. Finally, the edict turns to the cities themselves. For any city that can demonstrate it has fully restored its primary temples and reinstituted the ancient festivals, the emperor grants a 10-year relief from the imperial grain levy. You can almost hear the governors and city councilmen across the empire doing the calculations. For a struggling provincial capital, this is a lifeline, a fortune, but the cost is apostasy. Conversely, for any city where a temple was destroyed by Christian mobs in the previous decades, a new tax will be levied upon the local Galilean community to pay for its reconstruction, stone by stone. It is collective punishment, disguised as restorative justice. As the herald finishes and rolls up the scroll, the silence that follows is more profound than before. It is the silence of a world that has been irrevocably broken in two. There are now two types of Roman citizens. There are the Hellenes, the true Romans, who can teach, hold office without suspicion, and whose cities are rewarded by the state. And there are the Galileans, a tolerated but disfavored sect, stripped of their wealth, barred from the cultural lifeblood of the empire, and burdened with the sins of their recent past. The poison of the chalice begins its work. In Alexandria, the great intellectual heart of the East, the Christian head of the famous catechetical school, is served a notice by a city magistrate. He is to cease all lectures on Plato immediately. His library, filled with priceless philosophical scrolls alongside theological texts, is declared a site of cultural contradiction and placed under the authority of the newly appointed pontifex of Egypt. In Ephesus, the bishop receives a bill from the provincial treasury. It is an invoice for the estimated cost of rebuilding the colossal temple of Artemis, one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world, which had been sacked and burned by a Christian mob a generation earlier. The sum is astronomical, enough to bankrupt every church in the province of Asia for a century. In Gaul, a Christian nobleman who has just secured a prestigious teaching post for his son in Burdigala finds the appointment rescinded. The governor, a loyal appointee of Julian's, sends a letter of regret, explaining that the post must now be filled by someone in harmony with the divine traditions of the Roman people. But Julian's new world is not born without resistance. It is a quiet, simmering resistance, not yet of the sword, but of the mind and the soul. Teachers hold secret classes in the back rooms of villas, reading Virgil by candlelight. Bishops write letters, passed from city to city by trusted deacons, their prose coded but their meaning clear. Hold fast. Do not bend. The Lord is testing us. They begin to compile lists of every confiscated chalice, every seized estate, every teacher driven from his post. It is a catalogue of grievances, an arsenal of resentments waiting for a spark. Julian, in his palace, sees none of this. He sees only the reports of progress. He reads that the city of Bostra in Arabia has begun rebuilding its temple to Zeus Ammon. He receives a letter from Athens congratulating him on saving Hellenic culture. He believes he is healing the empire, cauterizing a wound, restoring it to its glorious, rational past. He is the physician, applying a harsh but necessary cure. He is drinking from his poisoned chalice, and he calls the taste victory. He cannot feel the poison spreading through the veins of the empire, not yet. He cannot see that with every new Hellenic priest he appoints, with every Christian teacher he silences, he is not building a single, purified Roman identity. He is building two, and they are irreconcilable. You are in Antioch, the Pearl of the East, in the spring of the year 364. This is not the refined, philosophical atmosphere of Constantinople. This is a city with a harder edge, a sprawling metropolis where Greek rhetoric mixes with the harsh syllables of Syriac in the marketplaces. It is a city of passions, a place of deep and fervent Christian faith, one of the first places where the followers of Christ were called by that name. The bones of saints and martyrs are not just relics here. They are the city's proudest citizens, their tombs the centre of civic life. And the people of Antioch have chafed under Julian's rule more than any other. They mock his beard, his philosophical asceticism, his love for the bloody stench of sacrifice. They are a powder keg of resentment, and the emperor has just lit the fuse. The issue is, as it so often is, about water. At the edge of the city lies the Grove of Daphne, a beautiful park of cypress trees and cool springs, once sacred to Apollo. A generation ago, the Christians built a church in the centre of the grove, containing the relics of Saint Babylas, a bishop martyred a century before. In their view, they had sanctified a place of pagan debauchery. In Julian's view, they had desecrated a holy site. One of his first acts upon his return was to order the relics removed and the temple of Apollo rebuilt. The new pontifex of Syria, a stern Neoplatonist named Libanius, who was once Julian's teacher, arrives with a cohort of legionaries to oversee the work. He is a man of letters, not of the sword, and he misunderstands the city's mood. He sees the sullen crowds that gather to watch the exhumation as merely resentful, not dangerous. The relics of St. Babylas are placed on a simple wooden cart. As it begins its journey back into the city, something extraordinary happens. The crowd does not shout or throw stones. They begin to sing. It starts as a low hum, a mournful psalm, and it swells into a thunderous chorus that echoes through the colonnaded streets. It is a river of humanity following the bones of their saint, a slow, solemn, and deeply defiant procession. They are reclaiming their martyr from the pagan emperor. That night, a fire breaks out in the newly rebuilt temple of Apollo at Daphne. By dawn, the magnificent structure, its fresh paint and gilded roof timbers barely settled, is a smoking ruin. The colossal statue of Apollo, a masterpiece of the age, is a blackened, shattered husk. Julian, receiving the news by fast courier in Constantinople, is enraged. He sees this not as a riot, but as a calculated act of sedition, an open declaration of war by the Christians of Antioch. He dispatches his most trusted commander, the Magister Peditum Nevita, a grim Pannonian pagan, with a simple order: find the perpetrators and make an example of them. Nevita arrives in Antioch, not as a peacekeeper, but as an avenger. His legions seal the city gates. He invokes the lex talionis, the law of retaliation, on a civic scale. Since the city collectively will not produce the arsonists, the city will be collectively punished. You see the scene unfold in the main forum. Nevita has rounded up the city's bishop and a dozen of the most prominent Christian priests and deacons. They are brought in chains before a hastily erected tribunal. Libanius, the pontifex, looks on, his face a mask of pale distress. This was not the philosophical restoration he had imagined. Navita's justice is swift and brutal. There is no trial, only an accusation. The bishop, an old man named Meletius, is scourged in the public square, his back laid open by the centurion's rod. 10 priests are sentenced to the mines for life, a sentence worse than death. 2 deacons, young, fiery men, who had been heard preaching against the emperor, are condemned to be burned alive as arsonists and traitors. This is the moment the Cold War of the Edict of Purity turns hot. The simmering resentment boils over into open fury. As the 2 deacons are tied to stakes, the crowd's sullen silence breaks. A stone is thrown, then another. Soon, a hail of rocks and roof tiles rains down on the legionaries, who stand firm, a wall of shields and iron discipline. Navita, his face like granite, gives a signal. The horn blasts once. The legionaries draw their swords. They do not just disperse the crowd, they charge into it. The disciplined advance becomes a slaughter. The square, a place of commerce and civic discourse, becomes a killing field. The cobblestones run slick with a substance the city has not seen shed in such quantities in generations. Men, women, children, it makes no difference. They are not citizens. They are rebels. The news of the massacre of Antioch spreads not by official dispatch, but by the terrified refugees who manage to bribe their way out of the sealed city. It is carried by merchants on the sea routes to Alexandria and Rome, and by camel caravans along the desert roads to Palestine. And as the story is told, it grows and transforms. The 2 deacons become miracle workers whose faith quenched the flames before they died. The slain in the square are not rioters, but worshippers, cut down while praying. The number of the dead doubles, then triples. The reality was brutal enough. The legend becomes an epic of persecution. In the scattered Christian communities, the lists of grievances compiled after the Edict of Purity are brought out. A new, bloody chapter is added. But it is more than a grievance now. It is a call to action. Preachers, once cautious, now speak openly of Julian as the Antichrist, the beast foretold in the Apocalypse. They speak of the sacred duty of resistance to a tyrannical emperor possessed by demons. The abstract legal and financial injuries of the edict are now given a face. The face of a martyred deacon, wreathed in flames. The face of a child lying broken on the stones of Antioch. The seeds of holy war are sown. In North Africa, the fiery Donatist communities, who have long seen the mainstream church as compromised, now see their prophecies of a corrupt, pagan Rome fulfilled. In Egypt, the desert monks, the anchorites, who live in ascetic isolation, begin to organize, their reputation for holiness giving them immense authority among the Coptic peasants. Julian, back in his capital, reads Navita's official report. Order has been restored, it says. The sedition has been cauterized. He approves of his general's methods. A surgeon cannot be gentle when cutting out a cancer. He believes he has extinguished a spark. He cannot comprehend that he has instead thrown a torch into a warehouse of dry tinder. The names of the dead deacons of Antioch, whose real names are lost to the chaos, are replaced by a single powerful title: the martyrs of the Restoration. Their story becomes the gospel of the rebellion. Their blood, the ink in which the declaration of a coming civil war will be written. The poisoned chalice, once sipped, is now being gulped. The taste is no longer victory. It is the bitter metallic taste of Roman blood, shed by Roman hands, on Roman soil, and the thirst is unquenchable. The news travels west. It moves faster than a legion on the march. carried on merchant ships that ply the great sea road of the Mediterranean. From the docks of Ostia, it is carried up the Tiber to Rome, and from there it travels the stone-paved highways north, over the Alps, and into the cold, forested lands of Gaul. The story of the Antioch massacre arrives not as a dry report, but as a feverish, whispered horror. It is told in taverns, in the private chapels of Christian senators, and in the barracks of the Rhine legions, and in the city of Lutetia Parisiorum, a provincial town of stone and wood on the banks of the Sequana. It finds the one man who can turn outrage into an army. You are in the modest praetorium of Lutetia, the headquarters of the master of the horse for Gaul. The man who sits at the heavy oak table is the physical and spiritual opposite of Julian. This is Flavius Valentinianus. He is not a philosopher. He is a soldier, born and bred in the Pannonian frontier lands. He is huge, a bear of a man with a ruddy complexion and fists like stones. Where Julian is ascetic and slight, Valentinian is a man of vast appetites and volcanic temper. And where Julian offers sacrifices to Apollo, Valentinian kneels every morning, a devout Nicene Christian, and prays to the God of hosts. He served with Julian in Persia, and the two men have a history of quiet animosity. Years earlier, Valentinian, then a junior officer, was dismissed from his post for striking a pagan priest who had sprinkled him with lustral water at the entrance to a temple, an act he considered a defiling blasphemy. Julian, ever the philosopher, had simply demoted him. Now, Valentinian commands the single most powerful field army in the Western Empire, the bulwark against the Germanic tribes across the Rhine. He is reading a letter, delivered by a secret courier from a fellow Christian officer in Rome. The parchment crackles in his massive hands. It details the events in Antioch, not the sanitized official version, but the graphic, bloody account passed among the faithful. It speaks of the scourged bishop, the burned deacons, the slaughter in the forum. As Valentinian reads, you can see the color rising in his face, a dark, dangerous flush. He crushes the letter in his fist. His Christian faith is not the nuanced philosophical construct of the Eastern bishops. It is the simple, powerful, and uncompromising faith of a soldier. He believes in a God of justice, a God who protects the faithful and punishes the wicked. He sees the world in stark terms: good and evil, light and darkness, Christ and the apostate. The news from Antioch is not a political crisis for him. It is a spiritual abomination. The emperor is no longer just a misguided pagan. He is a butcher of saints, an enemy of God. For weeks, Valentinian does nothing, a volcano showing no sign of its impending eruption. He drills his legions, inspects the frontier forts, and sends dispatches to Britain and Hispania, asking after the state of their garrisons. But he is also listening. He meets in secret with the Christian bishops of Gaul, powerful men from cities like Lugdunum and Treverorum. They tell him of the local impact of Julian's Edict of Purity, the confiscation of church lands, the Christian teachers dismissed, the growing climate of fear. They see in him not just a general, but a potential saviour, a new Constantine. The turning point comes with the arrival of an imperial herald from Constantinople. The herald carries a new decree from Julian. Every legionary, before receiving his pay, must offer a single grain of incense at a small altar set up before the legion standards, which are now adorned with the image of Sol Invictus. It is a loyalty test, a seemingly minor act. But for Valentinian and his men, it is everything. It is a demand to commit idolatry, to honor the demon gods of the apostate. The herald makes his proclamation in the main camp outside Mogontiacum, a key fortress on the Rhine. Valentinian stands before his assembled officers, the herald beside him. After the decree is read, A chilling silence falls over the hardened veterans. You can feel the tension, the coiled spring of 1,000 resentments. Valentinian steps forward. He looks not at the herald, but at his men. Men he has led through a dozen campaigns against the Alemanni. "I am a Christian," he says, his voice a low growl that carries across the field. "I will not do it. My men will not do it. We worship the God who gives us victory, not the idols of a madman who murders his own citizens." He turns to the stunned herald. "You will return to your master," he says, his voice dripping with contempt. "Tell the philosopher that the Rhine legions serve the Roman Empire and the true God. They do not serve him." He then does something that shatters 2 centuries of military protocol. He reaches out, rips the silken banner of Sol Invictus from the legion's eagle standard, and throws it to the ground. He stomps on it with his hobnailed boot, grinding the image of the sun god into the mud. A roar goes up from the legions. It is a sound of immense, explosive relief, of chains being broken. It is a roar of acclamation. They raise their shields and hammer them with the pommels of their swords, the thunderous, deafening salute given to a new emperor. Valentinian has crossed the Rubicon. This is not a protest. It is a declaration of rebellion. He is not just refusing an order. He is claiming a higher authority. He sends emissaries to the legions in Britain and Hispania, carrying news of his actions and calling on them to join him in defense of the faith. He sends riders to the great Christian senators in Rome, men whose families have felt the sting of Julian's disfavor. He begins to prepare for war. He is a practical man. He knows that Julian controls the vast wealth and manpower of the East. To fight him, he needs more soldiers. He turns to the very people he has spent his career fighting. He opens negotiations with the chieftains of the Franks and the Alemanni across the Rhine. He offers them what they have always dreamed of: gold, land within the empire, and the status of foederati, federates of Rome. The price is simple. They must swear an oath of loyalty not to the empire, but to him, and they must convert to his Nicene faith. Christian missionaries, protected by legionaries, cross the Rhine into the dark forests of Germania. They carry not just the Gospels, but bags of gold coins and promises of Roman steel. For the Germanic warlords, it is an irresistible offer. They get to join the winning side in a Roman civil war, with the blessing of a powerful new war god who seems to grant victory to the man from Lutetia. Within months, the army of Gaul is transformed. It is a hybrid force, a corps of disciplined Roman legions, supplemented by thousands of ferocious, long-haired Frankish and Alemanni warriors. They are baptized in mass ceremonies in the freezing waters of the Rhine, their old oaths to Wotan replaced by a new one to Jesus Christ and his chosen general, Valentinian. A new de facto Roman state is born in the West. It is a military, aggressively Christian entity, a fusion of Roman discipline and Germanic ferocity, forged in the fires of religious outrage. Valentinian does not yet claim the title of Augustus. He styles himself protector of the faithful. He orders the Chi-Rho, the symbol of Constantine, painted on every shield. The poisoned chalice has done its work. Julian's attempt to purify the empire has instead split it in two. He wanted to force a choice, and he has gotten one. Across the Rhine, a new power is rising. A Christian Roman general at the head of a half-barbarian army, preparing to march east. The whispers of Antioch have become the roar of the Rhine legions. The news of Valentinian's rebellion arrives in Constantinople not with the speed of a whispered rumour, but with the cold, hard finality of an official diplomatic mission. The men Valentinian sends are not furtive messengers. They are high-ranking tribunes, proud and unbowed. They enter the great palace and deliver their message to the emperor himself. It is a declaration, wrapped in the thinnest veil of Roman legalism. The armies and people of Gaul, they announce, can no longer in good conscience obey the edicts of an emperor who has made war upon God and his own citizens. They declare Julian Hostis Publicus a public enemy and proclaim their general, Flavius Valentinianus, as protector fidei, protector of the faith. You are there in the throne room, a vast space of marble and gold, designed to awe and intimidate. But today, the intimidation fails. Julian sits on the throne of Constantine, a small, bearded figure, swallowed by its immensity. As the Gallic tribunes speak, a muscle twitches in his jaw. The philosopher is gone, replaced by the hardened soldier who survived Persia. He does not rage. His voice, when he speaks, is chillingly calm. So the dog I spared has learned to bite, he says, his eyes boring into the tribunes. You may tell the butcher of Pannonia that he has mistaken his own treason for God's will. He has chosen his path. I shall choose the field on which it ends. He dismisses them not with a gesture, but with a look of utter contempt. They are arrested as they leave the chamber, their diplomatic immunity a fiction in the face of civil war. The city is instantly transformed. The quiet, scholarly debates in the palace are replaced by the urgent clang of the armories. Couriers gallop out of the Golden Gate, carrying mobilization orders to the legions on the Danube and the eastern frontier. Julian is a man possessed, working with a terrifying energy. He spends 18 hours a day with his generals and logisticians, his maps spread across vast tables. He is once again the brilliant commander who outmaneuvered the Alemanni in Gaul a decade earlier. This is a problem he understands. Armies, supply lines, terrain. This is the brutal calculus of power, a world away from the messy, unpredictable business of changing men's souls. He delivers a speech to the Senate of Constantinople. He stands before them not in his philosopher's cloak, but in the full regalia of a Roman commander. A gilded cuirass, a purple military cloak, his hand resting on the pommel of his spatha. He lays out Valentinian's treason, framing it not as a religious dispute, but as a simple, barbaric power grab. He calls Valentinian a crude soldier who has allied himself with the enemies of Rome, the long-haired savages from beyond the Rhine. He vows to crush this rebellion and restore the unity and dignity of the empire. The Hellenist senators roar their approval, but the few remaining Christian senators sit in stony silence, their faces grim. They know this is not a war against a mere usurper. This is a war against them. The symbols of the conflict are forged in these feverish months of preparation. In Julian's camp, the dominant image is the Sunday. The workshops of the capital produce thousands of shields emblazoned with the radiating corona of Sol Invictus. New standards are created, topped not with the eagle, but with a golden sunburst. Julian's elite guard units, the Ioviani and Herculiani, are reconsecrated to Jupiter and Hercules. He makes a grand public sacrifice at a newly built temple to Mars Ultor, Mars the Avenger, invoking the most ancient war god of the Roman people. His army will be the army of light, reason, and tradition. Meanwhile, in the West, a parallel transformation is underway. Valentinian, now headquartered in the strategic city of Mediolanum, has been formally acclaimed Augustus by his troops. He is no longer merely a protector, he is a rival emperor. His propaganda is just as potent as Julian's. Mint masters in Gaul begin striking coins that show Valentinian holding the labarum, the standard of Constantine, with the inscription Restituta Republicae, Restorer of the Republic, implicitly casting Julian as the destroyer. Valentinian's army is a fearsome hybrid entity. You see them on the drill fields of northern Italy. Cohorts of disciplined, professional Roman legionaries, their movements precise, standing shoulder to shoulder with huge, boisterous Frankish warriors, their hair greased and plaited, their hands clutching heavy throwing axes, the Francisci. The common bond is the new faith. Bishops move through the camps, baptizing the Germanic federates, preaching sermons that promise salvation to any who fall in the coming holy war. Their shields bear the simple, stark geometry of the Chi-Rho. It is an army that fights for Christ, for their general emperor, and for the promise of land and gold. The battle lines are drawn across the map of the world. Julian holds the east. Thrace, Asia Minor, Syria, Egypt. He has the larger population, the greater wealth, and the powerful naval fleet. Valentinian controls the west. Gaul, Britain, Hispania, and now northern Italy and Africa. He has the superior heavy cavalry and the fanatical loyalty of his Romano-Germanic army. The dividing line is the rugged, mountainous terrain of Illyricum, the modern Balkans, the same land that has birthed so many soldier emperors. It is here all agree that the fate of the world will be decided. Julian makes the first move. He marches from Constantinople at the head of a massive host, perhaps 100,000 strong. It is the largest Eastern Roman army assembled in a century. They move with the relentless, practiced efficiency of the Roman war machine. The long column snakes through the passes of the Haemus Mountains, a river of steel and leather flowing west. Julian rides at its head, not in a litter, but on horseback, sharing the same rations as his men. His physical toughness, a source of constant inspiration. Valentinian is not idle. He leads his own army, smaller, but arguably tougher, out from Mediolanum. They cross the Julian Alps, a grim procession of Christian soldiers and their barbarian allies, moving east to meet the storm. Valentinian is in his element. The political maneuvering is over. This is what he was born for. He is a whirlwind of energy, personally inspecting every cohort, his booming voice echoing across the encampments. Two eagles, symbols of the same empire, are now flying towards each other on a collision course. One is the eagle of Jupiter, ancient and proud, representing the glories of the past. The other is the eagle of Constantine, repurposed for Christ, representing a newer, fiercer vision of the future. The soldiers on both sides are Romans. They speak the same Latin, use the same tactics, honor the same military traditions. Many of them served together in the same legions only years before. Now, they are marching to kill each other over the nature of God. You can feel the ground tremble as the two great armies converge. The fate of the Roman world, the future of Western civilization, will not be decided by a philosopher's argument or a bishop's sermon. It will be decided in the crucible of battle by the brutal arithmetic of sword, spear, and shield. The civil war has been declared. The armies are on the march. The world holds its breath. The autumn rains have turned the plains of Pannonia into a dreary landscape of mud and mist. Here, in the heart of Illyricum, near the banks of a cold, fast-flowing river known as the Frigidus, the two halves of the Roman world finally meet. This is a place haunted by history. A generation from now, in another timeline, a different Christian emperor would crush a different pagan usurper on this very ground, securing the future of Christianity. But in this world, history has not yet been written, and the gods, both old and new, are watching to see which of their champions will prevail. You are with Julian's army as they make camp on the eastern side of the river. The scouts have returned with grim news. Valentinian's forces are entrenched on the far bank, holding the high ground and blocking the main pass through the Julian Alps. They are a wall of iron between Julian and Italy. Julian's army is larger, but Valentinian's position is superior. The apostate emperor, a master of strategy, knows that a frontal assault across the river would be suicide. He spends a day observing the enemy lines, his face a mask of concentration. He sees the Chi emblazoned on 1,000 shields, a forest of Christian iconography, and his resolve hardens. That night, he calls his council of war. He reveals a daring plan, one born of his campaigns, in the dense forests of Gaul. He will take his elite mobile units, the Praetorian Guard, the Scutarii cavalry, and 2 legions of Batavian auxiliaries on a secret, forced march north. They will cross the river miles upstream, at an unguarded ford, and circle behind Valentinian's army, falling on their rear at dawn. At the same time, the main army, under the command of the ruthless Novita, will launch a full-scale diversionary attack across the river, pinning Valentinian's forces in place. It is a classic pincer movement, a gamble that relies on speed, silence, and surprise. The march is a nightmare. Under the cloak of a moonless, rainy night, Julian leads his 10,000-strong flanking force through dense woods and treacherous terrain. The men are silent, their gear muffled, the only sounds the squelch of boots in mud and the quiet curses of a stumbled soldier. Julian is everywhere, a tireless, spectral figure, whispering encouragement. His presence a tangible force driving them onward. At dawn, you are with them as they emerge from the woods, weary and mud-caked, onto the high ridge behind Valentinian's camp. Below them, the Christian army is facing east, preparing for the morning attack. They have no idea that death is poised to strike from their rear. The morning mist still clings to the valley floor, muffling the sounds of Novita's main army beginning its slow, deliberate advance towards the river. Julian draws his sword. The sun, his god, breaks through the clouds for a moment, glinting off the polished steel. A horn blasts, a single, piercing note that cuts through the morning quiet. It is the signal. The attack is a masterpiece of shock and awe. The Scutarii cavalry crashes into the rear of the camp like a thunderbolt, scattering supply wagons and panicked soldiers. Julian's infantry follows. A disciplined wave of steel, their war cry, Mars Ultor, a terrifying pagan sound to the Christian soldiers. Valentinian is caught completely by surprise. His command tent is overrun in the first minutes of the assault. But he is a warrior, not a strategist. He does not panic. Roaring like a cornered bear, he grabs his helmet and sword, hacks his way out of the tent, and bellows for his personal guard, the Frankish comitatus. He forms a shield wall around his position, a small island of desperate courage in a sea of chaos. The battle for the camp is savage and intimate. It is not a fight of formations and tactics, but 1,000 individual duels. Roman kills Roman. Men who might have shared a campfire a year ago now drive swords into each other's guts. The Frankish federates, fighting with a berserker fury, are instrumental in preventing a total collapse. Their wild charges blunt the momentum of Julian's disciplined legionaries. On the far side of the river, Novita hears the sounds of battle from the rear. He gives the order for the main assault. His legions surge into the cold, rushing water of the Frigidus, holding their shields above their heads against a hail of arrows and catapult stones. The river runs red. They claw their way up the muddy western bank, and the battle becomes a two-front war. For hours, the outcome hangs on a knife's edge. Julian's pincer has closed, but the jaws have not yet crushed their prey. Valentinian's army, though caught in a tactical nightmare, is fighting with the ferocious desperation of trapped men. They are fueled by a righteous fury, believing they are fighting not just for their lives, but for their immortal souls. Bishops and priests move behind the battle lines, not with swords, but with crucifixes, their voices rising in prayer, urging the men to stand firm against the legions of the apostate. The climax of the battle occurs in the late afternoon. Julian, leading a charge to break the last pocket of resistance around Valentinian's command post, comes face to face with his rival. The two emperors, the two halves of the Roman soul, meet amidst a maelstrom of violence. They are both on foot, their guards locked in a desperate struggle around them. For a moment, they simply stare at each other, the slight, bearded philosopher, king, and the giant, bull-necked soldier. It is a clash of worlds. Julian lunges, a quick, precise thrust. Valentinian, a brawler, parries with a crash of steel and swings his heavier spatha in a brutal arc that Julian barely dodges. But they are emperors, not duelists. They are pulled apart by their frantic bodyguards before a decisive blow can be struck. As dusk falls, the fighting subsides, not because of a victory, but because of sheer, mutual exhaustion. The battlefield is a vision of hell. The ground is a churned morass of mud and bodies. The river is choked with the dead. Neither side can claim victory. Julian holds the field, but at a terrible cost. His elite flanking force has been savaged, taking grievous casualties. Valentinian has been driven from his position, but his army, though battered and bloodied, has withdrawn in good order into the mountain passes, forming a new defensive line. He has lost the battle, but he has not lost the war. The great, decisive confrontation has ended in a bloody, horrifying stalemate. Julian has shattered the offensive strength of the Western army, but in doing so, he has broken his own sword hand. Navita's legions, who took the worst of the casualties in the river crossing, are in no shape to pursue. The campaign season is ending. Winter is coming. Julian stands on the ridge overlooking the valley of the dead. He has won the ground, but he has not won the victory he needed. He wanted to annihilate the Christian army, to kill its leader and end the war in a single, glorious blow. Instead, he has bled his own legions white against an enemy that will not break. He tastes not the wine of triumph, but the bitter ash of a Pyrrhic victory. He won the battle, but the war for the soul of Rome is far from over, and both sides have now been bled of their best and bravest, leaving the empire weaker and more vulnerable than ever before. While the heart of the Roman world tears itself apart in the misty valleys of Illyricum, you feel a shift in the world's balance of power far to the east. You are in the Sasanian capital of Ctesiphon, a city of magnificent palaces on the banks of the Tigris. Here, the news of the Roman civil war is not a tragedy. It is a golden opportunity, a gift from the gods, Ahura, Mazda, and Mithra. King of Kings, Shapur II, sits on his throne. He is a man who has spent his entire, long reign in conflict with Rome. He has fought Constantine's sons and was nearly humbled by Julian's invasion just 2 years prior. He was forced to sign a humiliating peace treaty, ceding territory and influence in Armenia and Mesopotamia. He looks upon the Romans not just as rivals, but as arrogant fools. A people whose internal squabbles consistently offer him a path to victory. A stream of spies and merchants, travelling the Silk Road and the desert caravan routes, bring him detailed reports from the West. They speak of 2 Roman emperors, each stripping the frontiers of their best legions to feed the furnace of their civil war. They tell of the great, bloody battle by the cold river, a battle from which neither side emerged a true victor, a battle that consumed the flower of Roman manhood. They confirm his spies' most optimistic reports. The great fortress cities of the eastern frontier, Nisibis, Amida Singara, are garrisoned by mere skeleton crews, old men and young boys left behind to man the walls. Shapur smiles. It is a cold, calculating expression. The treaty he signed with Julian was an oath sworn to a man, not to a concept. With that man now engaged in a life-or-death struggle 1,000 miles away, the oath is meaningless. He sees the hand of fate at work. The Romans are weakening themselves, destroying themselves, for the sake of an obscure theological dispute he neither understands nor cares about. It is time to reclaim what is his. He sends for his generals, the sparbeds, and the commanders of his elite cavalry, the Aswaran. He does not need to rally them with speeches. They are veterans, men who burn with the shame of the recent peace. The order is given. The full might of the Sasanian army is to be mobilized, not for a border raid, but for a full-scale invasion, a holy war to drive the Romans out of lands that have been Persian soil for centuries. The invasion, when it comes, is not a single thrust but a three-pronged assault, a testament to sophisticated Sasanian planning. One army, led by Shapur himself, strikes north into the client kingdom of Armenia. The Armenian king, a Christian, is a natural ally of Valentinian's faction, but he receives no Roman aid. His army is swept aside. Shapur captures the king, has him blinded, and installs a pro-Persian nobleman on the throne. With Armenia neutralized, the northern flank of Roman Syria is now completely exposed. A second army pours across the Tigris and lays siege to the fortress cities. You are there at the walls of Nisibis, a city that has been the bedrock of Roman eastern defense for 100 years. You see the Sasanian siege train, a terrifying spectacle of armored war elephants, towering siege towers, and massive catapults. The Roman garrison, a shadow of its former self, fights with the courage of desperation. But courage is not enough. After a brutal, month-long siege, the walls are breached. The city falls. Shapur, in a gesture of calculated mercy and strategic foresight, does not massacre the populace. He deports them, tens of thousands of skilled artisans, engineers, and administrators, and resettles them deep within his own empire, a massive transfer of human and intellectual capital. One by one, the other fortresses of Mesopotamia meet the same fate. The third and most audacious prong of the attack is a massive raid deep into the province of Syria itself. A force of 10,000 cataphracts, the heavily armoured shock cavalry of the Sasanian army, bypasses the main Roman defences. They are not there to conquer territory, but to plunder and terrorize. They move with terrifying speed. A shimmering tide of steel. They fall upon towns and villas that have not seen an enemy army in a century. They burn fields, sack minor cities, and carry off thousands of slaves and immense quantities of loot. Their target is symbolic. They ride to the very gates of Antioch. The city, still reeling from Nevitta's massacre, and ruled by Julian's appointed Hellenist governor, panics. The garrison is too small to risk open battle. The Persian cavalry circles the great walls, a gesture of profound contempt. Before turning back east, their pack animals laden with the wealth of Roman Syria, the message is clear. The shield of Rome is broken. News of the disaster on the eastern front reaches Julian in his winter camp in Illyricum. It arrives as a succession of devastating blows. Armenia is lost. The Mesopotamian forts have fallen. Syria itself has been violated. The peace treaty he won at such cost is now a dead letter. He is trapped. He cannot abandon the war against Valentinian. To turn his back would be to invite an attack from the west. But he cannot ignore the existential threat in the east. His entire empire is now caught in a two-front war, the very nightmare that has haunted Roman strategic thinking for centuries. He is forced to do the unthinkable. He detaches 2 of his best legions, already under strength from the Battle of the Frigidus, and sends them on a desperate forced march east under his general, Victor, with orders to stabilize the Syrian front. It is a drop of water on a raging fire. This action further weakens his army facing Valentinian, making any future offensive in the west impossible. The bloody stalemate has now become a permanent strategic paralysis. Shapur's Gambit has succeeded beyond his wildest dreams. He has not just reconquered lost territory, he has fundamentally altered the strategic landscape. He now controls the key trade routes to the east and has a secure northern flank in Armenia. He has enriched his kingdom, strengthened his army, and shattered Roman prestige. The poisoned chalice Julian drank from is now affecting the entire body of the empire. His great victory and survival, which led to the civil war, has now led directly to this catastrophic breach on the eastern frontier. The legions that should have been defending Nisibis were instead dying on the banks of the Frigidus. The resources that should have been reinforcing Syria were being spent on a war of brother against brother. Shapur II did not defeat the Roman Empire. He simply waited, patiently, for the Roman Empire to defeat itself. The storm that breaks upon the Danube frontier is not like the calculated, strategic invasion of the Sasanians. It is something far more primal, a force of nature. For years, a terror has been building on the vast Eurasian steppe. A new people, the Huns, whose mastery of horsemanship and the composite bow has made them an unstoppable tide of conquest. They are not empire builders. They are a wave of destruction that shatters everything in its path. Now, that wave has crashed into the Gothic kingdoms north of the Danube. You are there, in a makeshift refugee camp on the northern bank of the great river. It is a scene of human misery on a scale that beggars description. Tens of thousands, perhaps hundreds of thousands, of Gothic people, the Turvingi and the Gruthungi, are huddled here. They are not an invading army. They are an entire nation, displaced and terrified. Their fields have been burned, their villages razed, their armies scattered by the Hunnic whirlwind. Behind them is annihilation. Before them is the river, and beyond it, the Roman Empire, their only hope for survival. Their leaders, chieftains like Fritigern, send desperate embassies across the river to the Roman commanders of the province of Moesia. They do not ask for conquest. They beg for sanctuary. They offer their swords, their families, their complete loyalty to the emperor in exchange for land and food for a chance to live. In a stable timeline, this would be a moment of crisis, but a manageable one. The emperor would negotiate from a position of strength, dictating terms, disarming the warriors, and carefully settling the refugees in designated areas. But this is not a stable timeline. The emperor is Julian, and he is 1,000 miles away, his eyes fixed on the Persian menace in the east and the Christian rebel in the west. The elite legions of the Danube, the comitatenses, have long since been stripped from the frontier to fight at the Frigidus. The men guarding this border are second-rate Limitani, garrison troops, spread thin and terrified by the sheer scale of the human tide gathering on the opposite bank. The local commanders, men like Lupicinus and Maximus, are paralyzed. Their orders from the emperor are vague and contradictory. Maintain the border at all costs, but also do not provoke any new conflicts. With no clear leadership and insufficient troops, they dither. They refuse to allow the Goths to cross, fearing an invasion they cannot control, but they also lack the forces to drive them away. The situation in the Gothic camps deteriorates from desperate to apocalyptic. Starvation sets in, followed by disease. The Roman commanders, seeing a chance for profit, engage in a sickening trade, exchanging dog meat for Gothic children sold into slavery. The desperation of the Goths turns to a cold, burning rage. They did not come as enemies, but they are being treated as worse than animals. Fritigern, a canny and ruthless leader, sees that begging for entry is futile. He realizes something crucial: the Romans guarding the frontier are weak. He sends his agents, under the cover of darkness, to the other side of the river. They carry not pleas, but promises. They find their way into the camps of other barbarian mercenaries already in Roman service: Alans, Bastane, even a few Hunnic cavalry troops. They offer a share of the spoils of a rich, undefended Roman province. They also find a receptive audience in the rival Roman factions. Messengers from Julian's camp arrive, offering Frigid gold and recognition if he will march his warriors south to serve as mercenaries against Valentinian. Almost simultaneously, agents from Valentinian cross the Alps, promising the Goths land and full status as federates if they will swear allegiance to the Christian emperor and attack Julian's dominion of Illyricum. You see Frigid standing on a low hill, looking at the distant, glittering eagles of the Roman forts. He is being courted by two rival halves of the very empire that is starving his people. The irony is not lost on him. He realizes he is no longer a beggar. He is a kingmaker. He holds the fate of the Balkans in his hands. He makes a decision born of pure pragmatism. He accepts both offers. He takes Julian's gold and Valentinian's promises. He uses the chaos of the competing Roman bids to his advantage. One stormy night, his warriors, emboldened and equipped with Roman coin, build thousands of crude rafts and dugout canoes. They cross the Danube, not as refugees, but as an invading army. The thin line of Limitani is simply swept away. Some are killed, but many, seeing the futility of resistance, desert their posts and flee. The province of Moesia lies open and vulnerable. The Goths, joined by their new Alan and Hun allies, become a torrent of destruction. But this is not a simple barbarian raid. It is something new and far more dangerous. They are not just plundering. They are fighting for a home. And they are not alone. As they march inland, they find the region is already a powder keg. The civil war has left the Balkans in a state of semi-anarchy. Cities have declared for Julian or Valentinian, and local militias skirmish in the hills. The Goths are a new, terrifyingly powerful piece on this chaotic chessboard. A local commander loyal to Julian gathers a small force of legionaries and town militias and attempts to stop the Gothic advance near the town of Marcianople. The resulting battle is a disaster for the Romans. Their small, ad hoc army is annihilated by the sheer numbers and desperation of the Gothic warriors. The defeat sends a shockwave through the region. It proves the Goths are not just a rabble. They are a potent military force. Now, the true chaos begins. The Goths are a free agent in the heart of the Roman civil war. A commander from Julian's faction offers Frigid a massive bribe to attack a city loyal to Valentinian. Frigid accepts, sacks the city, and takes the payment. A week later, he accepts a counter-offer from a Valentinian loyalist to ambush the Julianic commander's supply lines. The Goths become the ultimate mercenaries, a feral, independent army feeding on the carcass of a dying province, dramatically escalating the violence and chaos of the civil war. They are the physical manifestation of the empire's brokenness. They cross the Danube not into a functioning Roman state, but into a power vacuum, a war-torn no-man's land created by Julian's poisoned chalice. They are no longer a barbarian problem. They are now an integral and uncontrollable part of the Roman catastrophe. The gate that should have been guarded was left open, and the wolves are now inside, feasting in the ruins. You must now turn your gaze away from the grand sweep of armies and invasions and look deeper into the soul of the Roman soldier. For the war is no longer a mere political contest between two rivals. It has metastasized. The endless, grinding conflict fought without hope of a decisive victory, has transformed the very culture of the legions. The army is no longer a unified imperial institution. It is splitting into two ideologically opposed armed faiths. The war has become a crusade. You are in a Roman camp on a cold night in Illyricum. It is a camp of Valentinian's Western army, holding the line against Julian's forces. The sentries are at their posts, the standards are furled, but something profound is happening in the flickering torchlight. In the center of the camp, a crowd of soldiers is gathered around a large, horse trough-like basin filled with water. A Nicene bishop, his vestments worn and stained from the campaign, stands beside it. One by one, young recruits and hardened veterans alike step forward. These are men from the wild frontiers of Gaul, or Frankish warriors with the ink of their baptism barely dry. They are about to go on a night raid, a dangerous, uncertain enterprise. Before they go, they seek a different kind of strength. The bishop dips his hand in the water and makes the sign of the cross on each man's forehead. He anoints them not for salvation in the next life, but for victory in this one. In hoc signo vinces, he intones. By this sign you will conquer. It is the promise made to Constantine, now made to every common soldier. This is a new rite, born in the crucible of this holy war. It is a pre-battle baptism, a soldier's sacrament. It washes away not just sin, but fear. It transforms a military operation into an act of faith. The men who emerge from this ceremony are not just soldiers of Valentinian, they are soldiers of Christ. They believe that if they fall in battle against the pagan legions, their martyrdom is assured. Their helmets are their halos. Their swords are instruments of God's justice. Their hatred for the enemy is absolute and theological. They do not see other Romans across the battlefield. They see idolaters, demon worshippers, the defilers of saints. They whisper stories of Julian's men committing blasphemous parodies of the Eucharist, sacrificing black lambs on desecrated church altars. The war is no longer for territory or for an emperor. It is a cosmic struggle against evil itself. Their battle cries are not the name of their general, but the names of the martyrs of Antioch. Now, travel east, across the shattered landscape, to a camp of Julian's army, dug in on the Syrian frontier, facing the ever-present threat of the Sasanian cataphracts. Here, a different kind of faith is taking root, one that is equally intense and militaristic. You find yourself in a different sort of sanctuary. It is not a tent, but an underground chamber dug beneath a barracks, designed to look like a natural cave. The air is thick with the scent of incense and hot iron. This is a Mithraeum, a sanctuary of the god Mithras, the divine bull slayer, the favoured deity of the Roman legions for centuries. Julian's restoration has breathed new, urgent life into this ancient soldier's cult. A young tribune is undergoing the final stage of his initiation. He stands naked in a pit, his body tense. Above him, on a grated platform, a bull is sacrificed. The hot, thick life force of the animal pours down over him, a grotesque, visceral baptism. When he emerges, reborn, he is no longer just a Roman officer. He is a brother, a lion of Mithras, bound by a sacred oath to his fellow initiates and to his divine patron. He believes the blood has given him the bull's strength, its courage, its virility. Julian has actively encouraged this. He sees in the Mithraic mysteries the perfect antidote to the Galilean superstition. Mithraism is masculine, hierarchical, and demands unwavering loyalty and discipline, the very virtues of a good soldier. He has established Mithraea in every major encampment. The cult provides a powerful spiritual glue for his multi-ethnic, polytheistic army. A Greek philosopher from Athens and a Pannonian peasant who worships the sun god can find common ground in the shared ordeal and secret knowledge of the Mithraic rites. Their hatred for the enemy is just as profound as that of the Christians. They see Valentinian soldiers not as misguided Romans, but as fanatics, followers of a morbid, servile superstition from the East that despises the ancestral gods. They call them the corpse worshippers. They tell stories of the Christians in the West burning ancient libraries, smashing priceless statues, and enforcing a dull, joyless tyranny. Their war is a struggle to save civilization itself from a rising tide of ignorance and barbarism. Their battle cry is, "Sol Invictus," the unconquered sun, a declaration that light will triumph over the darkness of the Galilean faith. The symbols of the war are no longer just on the shields. They are etched into the souls of the men who fight it. A Christian soldier, captured by Julian's forces, is not treated as a prisoner of war. He is treated as a heretic. He is offered a choice: sacrifice to the emperor's genius, or face torture and execution. A pagan philosopher, caught behind Valentinian's lines, is seen as a sorcerer, a demon worshipper, and is often handed over to a mob for summary justice. The very concept of a shared Roman identity is dissolving in this acid bath of religious hatred. The old bonds of a common language, a common law, and a shared history are proving weaker than the new razor-sharp divisions of faith. An Arian Gothic mercenary in the Balkans, a Nicene Frank on the Rhine, a Mithraic legionary in Syria, and a Donatist skirmisher in the mountains of Numidia might all technically be fighting for or against a man who calls himself Roman emperor, but they share nothing else. They inhabit different mental and spiritual universes. The army, once the great engine of Romanization, the institution that turned conquered provincials into citizens and assimilated barbarians into the imperial system, has now become the primary engine of division. It is actively hardening the religious identities that are tearing the empire apart. Julian's victory, his survival, gave him the power to try and remake the spiritual world of the empire. The poisoned chalice was his belief that it could be done by force. The result is not the Hellenic purity he dreamed of, but a world where the Roman legionary's most important piece of equipment is no longer his shield or his sword, but the god he is willing to kill and die for. While the armies of the divided empire bleed each other white, a quieter, but no less profound, dissolution is taking place. You must now look at the very fabric of the Christian faith itself. For a generation, since the Council of Nicaea, the Church had been intertwined with the Roman state. The emperor was its patron, its enforcer, the final arbiter of its theological disputes. But with the state now fractured into a hostile pagan East and a besieged Christian West, that centralizing force is gone. The single chalice of orthodoxy, which Constantine had tried to force the whole world to drink from, now shatters into 1,000 pieces. You are in the Balkans, in the mobile camp of the Gothic warlord Frigid. He is meeting with a group of priests. These are not the Nicene bishops of Valentinian's court. They are followers of the teachings of Arius, men who believe that Christ the Son is a created being, subordinate to God the Father. This Arian form of Christianity, once condemned as a heresy by the unified Roman state, has found fertile ground among the Goths, thanks to the missionary work of Bishop Ulfilas. For Frigid, Arianism is not just a theological preference. It is a political tool. It gives his people a distinct identity. They are not the same as the Nicene Romans of the West, nor are they the pagans of the East. They are a third power, a Gothic Arian people. The priests are finalizing their translation of the Bible into the Gothic language, a monumental cultural achievement. They are creating not just a church, but a nation, defined by its own language, its own king, and its own unique version of the Christian faith. The political vacuum in the Balkans has allowed Arianism to flourish, not as a heresy, but as the state religion of a new, emerging kingdom carved from the flesh of the dying empire. Now, travel south, across the stormy Mediterranean, to the sun-baked plains of North Africa. You are in a fortified village in the mountains of Numidia. The people here are Christians, but they call themselves Donatists. For them, the central issue is not the nature of Christ, but the purity of the Church. They believe that any priest who buckled during the old persecutions of Diocletian the Traditores, who handed over the scriptures, was permanently tainted, as were all the bishops they consecrated. They see the mainstream Catholic Church, with its wealthy, politically connected bishops in Carthage and Rome, as corrupt and compromised, a church of sinners. Julian's rise was a gift to the Donatists. His edict of purity, which targeted the mainstream church, left their smaller, more isolated communities largely untouched. The civil war has been an even greater blessing. With Valentinian's legions bottled up in Italy and Julian's governors concerned with pagan restoration, no one is left to police North Africa. The Donatists, led by their fiery bishops and bands of armed followers known as the agonistici or champions, rise up. They drive out the Catholic clergy, seize their basilicas, and establish their own independent church state. Donatism becomes the faith of African resistance, a symbol of their defiance against a corrupt, distant Rome, whether it be pagan or Nicene. Africa, the breadbasket of the empire, begins to chart its own theological and political course. Finally, you must return to the heart of the conflict, to the Christian communities of the East, living under the shadow of Julian's Hellenic state. You are in a hidden church, in the catacombs beneath the city of Antioch. The people gathered here are terrified, but their fear is mingled with a new, hard-edged zealotry. They have seen their bishops scourged, their deacons burned, their neighbours cut down in the Forum. The sophisticated, philosophical Christianity of the great Eastern theologians seems like a useless abstraction to them now. A new kind of faith is being forged in this crucible of persecution. They call themselves the Vindicators, the Church of the Martyrs. They preach that the end times are at hand. Julian is the Antichrist. His pagan sacrifices the abomination of desolation. They reject any compromise with the Hellenic world. They preach a gospel of resistance, of holy vengeance. They believe that any Christian who serves in Julian's administration or army is an apostate, damned to hellfire. They are compiling new scriptures, secret books that tell the stories of the martyrs of Antioch, full of visions of avenging angels and prophecies of a river of fire that will consume the pagan emperor. This militant, apocalyptic sect is spreading like wildfire through the oppressed Christian communities of Syria and Egypt. A faith that offers no comfort, only the promise of a righteous and bloody vindication. The result of all this is the death of a unified Christendom. There is no longer a single church. Instead, there are now multiple competing Christianities, each tied to a specific geographical and political reality. There is the Nicene orthodoxy of Valentinian's Romano-Germanic West, a state church that demands absolute conformity. There is the Arianism of the Gothic kingdoms in the Balkans. There is the Donatist church state in Africa, and there is the apocalyptic Church of the Martyrs festering in the East. These are not minor theological disagreements. They are fundamental schisms, each faction viewing the others as heretics, as enemies of the true faith. A Nicene bishop from Gaul would see an Arian Goth as a blasphemer. A Donatist elder would view the Nicene bishop as a corrupt tool of a fallen empire, and a vindicator from Antioch would see them all as naive fools, failing to recognize that the final battle with Satan has already begun. The great irony is that Julian, by trying to destroy Christianity, has instead ensured its survival in 1,000 different forms. By removing the centralizing force of the Roman state, he shattered the mirror of the Church into countless shards. Each shard reflects a different image of Christ, a different vision of God's plan, and each is sharp enough to draw blood. The war for the soul of Rome is no longer a simple, binary conflict between pagan and Christian. It is now a multi-front war of all against all, a theological free-for-all, where every faction is certain of its own righteousness and the damnation of its enemies. You must now descend from the high realm of theology and strategy and look at the most basic level of human existence, the belly. For while emperors scheme and bishops preach, the common people must eat. The endless war is ravaging the imperial economy. The great, interconnected web of trade and agriculture that sustained the Roman world for centuries is beginning to unravel. The annona, the system of grain supply that fed the great cities of Rome and Constantinople, is collapsing. You are in the port of Ostia, the gateway to Rome, once a bustling hub of maritime commerce. Now, the docks are eerily quiet. The vast warehouses that once overflowed with grain from Egypt and Africa are half empty. The great grain ships, the navies, are few and far between. They are vulnerable to pirate raids, to storms, and to the simple fact that the provinces that once supplied the city are now in chaos. The Donatist warlords of Africa disrupt the grain shipments in the name of religious purity. They seize ships carrying grain to Rome, claiming that it is destined for a city of idolaters. In the east, Sasanian raids disrupt the flow of wheat from Egypt up the Nile. The Black Sea grain route, vital for Constantinople, is now infested with Gothic pirates, men who once begged for entry into the empire, but are now preying upon its collapsing trade routes. The whispers start in the insulae, the crowded apartment blocks of Rome. The bakers are rationing bread. The price of a loaf doubles, then triples. The poor begin to sell their few possessions for a handful of grain. The city's vast public works projects grind to a halt as funds are diverted to buying food. The games in the Colosseum, once a daily spectacle, become a rare and desperate attempt to distract the hungry masses. The Emperor Valentinian, besieged in his palace in Mediolanum, is well aware of the crisis in his capital. But his options are limited. His legions are needed to hold the mountain passes against Julian. He cannot spare the troops to secure the sea lanes. He issues edicts commanding the African bishops to release the grain ships, but his words carry little weight in a province controlled by armed Donatists. He resorts to a desperate measure, debasing the coinage. He orders the mints to mix copper with the silver in the argentius, hoping to stretch the money supply. This only accelerates the inflation, making food even more expensive and eroding confidence in the economy. The situation in Constantinople is even more dire. The East relies on the grain from Egypt, but the Sasanian raids have choked off the supply. Julian, facing a desperate situation on multiple fronts, is forced to requisition grain from Thrace and Asia Minor to feed his armies. The cities are left to starve. You see it in the streets of Constantinople. The faces of the people are gaunt, the markets are empty. The fountains, once symbols of civic pride, run dry. The great public baths, the social centres of the city, are closed for lack of fuel. Rumours spread that Julian is hoarding grain for his pagan priests, that he is deliberately starving the Christians. The demes, the traditional political factions that controlled the city's chariot races, become centres of unrest. The blues, once loyal to the emperor, begin to chant slogans against his rule, accusing him of incompetence and cruelty. The Greens, traditionally the party of the common people, openly call for his overthrow. The city is a tinderbox, waiting for a spark. That spark comes in the form of a failed grain shipment. A convoy of barges carrying grain from the Black Sea, escorted by a squadron of Roman warships, is ambushed by Gothic pirates just outside the Bosporus. The pirates are driven off, but not before they set fire to the barges. The smoke from the burning grain is visible from the city walls. The people, already on the edge of starvation, erupt. The riots begin spontaneously. In the poorest districts, mobs of hungry men and women pour into the streets, looting bakeries and granaries. They attack the homes of wealthy merchants and government officials, blaming them for the scarcity. The city guard, already demoralized and underpaid, are overwhelmed. Julian is forced to call out the legions, but even the hardened veterans are reluctant to fire upon their own people. The riots spread like wildfire, engulfing the entire city. The Great Mese, the central avenue, becomes a battleground. The rioters build barricades from overturned carts and paving stones. They hurl rocks and insults at the soldiers. The soldiers fire back, and the streets run red with Roman blood. The riots are not just about food. They are about resentment, about the simmering anger that has been building since Julian's religious restoration. The rioters attack pagan temples and shrines, smashing statues and burning incense. They target the homes of the emperor's pagan advisors, dragging them into the streets and lynching them. The riots are a manifestation of the deep, ungovernable rage that is consuming the empire. Julian is forced to barricade himself in the great palace. He is surrounded by his loyal guards, but he can hear the roar of the mob outside the walls. The Philosopher-King, who dreamed of restoring the glory of Rome, is now trapped in his palace, presiding over the collapse of his world. The poisoned chalice has now reached the very bottom. The endless war, the religious persecution, the collapsing trade routes, the debased coinage, all have combined to create a perfect storm of economic and social disaster. The cities, the engines of Roman civilization, are grinding to a halt, consumed by hunger, violence, and despair. The empire is not just fracturing politically and religiously, it is starving to death. You are in Constantinople in the grim summer of the year 367. The city is a shadow of its former self. The riots have been suppressed, not through reconciliation, but through sheer bloody force. Legionaries patrol the empty streets, their faces as gaunt as the starving citizens they police. The great palace is no longer the vibrant heart of an empire. It is a gilded fortress, an island of desperate order in a sea of despair. The air hangs heavy and still, thick with the stench of decay and the ever-present threat of disease that follows famine, as surely as night follows day. This is where the grand project of the Philosopher-King comes to its squalid and ignominious end. Emperor Julian is an old man before his time. His beard is streaked with grey, his body gaunt from the same meagre rations as the rest of the city. The brilliant, energetic commander who marched across Gaul and into Persia is gone, replaced by a weary, haunted figure. His days are a frantic, hopeless cycle of crisis management. A report of a new Sasanian raid in Syria, a dispatch detailing the advance of Gothic warbands in Thrace, a desperate plea for grain from the governor of Nicomedia. He is a man trying to plug 1,000 leaks in a shattered dam with his bare hands. His great Hellenic restoration is in ruins. The new pontificate he established has collapsed. The provincial high priests, men of philosophy and reason, have little authority over a populace consumed by the primal struggle for survival. The people do not want Platonic discourses, they want bread. His project was built on the assumption of a stable, prosperous empire, one that had the luxury of debating the nature of the divine. In a world of starvation and endemic warfare, it seems like a madman's fantasy. The plague begins in the crowded, unsanitary slums near the harbour. It might be a virulent strain of measles or smallpox, its exact nature lost to history, but its effect is absolute. It sweeps through the malnourished population of the city like a scythe. The daily death toll, already high from starvation, climbs into the thousands. Carts piled high with the dead rumble through the streets day and night. Their grim work unending. The city is dying. Julian, protected by the relative cleanliness and isolation of the palace, is safe for a time. But the plague does not respect imperial purple. It is brought into the palace by a servant, a cook, a guard. No one knows for sure. It spreads through the corridors and chambers, felling courtiers and ministers. Then, one morning, the emperor awakens with a fever. You are there, in the imperial bedchamber, a silent, unseen witness to the final act. The room is opulent, but the air is thick with the scent of sickness and fear. The best physicians in the East attend him. Their faces, masks of helpless concern. They offer cooling herbs and whispered incantations, but they know it is useless. The fever rages, a fire consuming the last of the emperor's strength. In his delirium, he does not see the worried faces of his doctors. He sees the ghosts of his failed dream. He argues with Christian bishops, his voice a hoarse whisper, his words a jumble of Greek philosophy and military commands. He sees the smoke rising from the temple of Apollo in Daphne. He feels the phantom pain of the Persian spear in his side, the wound that saved him only to deliver him to this far more wretched end. His pagan advisers, the last true believers of his circle, gather at his bedside. They make desperate sacrifices to Asclepius and Apollo, the gods of healing. They burn rare and precious incenses, but the gods are silent. There is no miracle this time. The spear was deflected, but the fever will not be denied. Maximus of Ephesus, the mystic who once promised Julian the aid of the gods, is a broken man. He sees in the emperor's dying gasps the final, irrefutable triumph of the Galilean. The great hope of the Hellenic world is dying of a common sickness in a starving city, his empire collapsing around him. The end comes on a sweltering afternoon. Julian's fever breaks, and for a few moments his mind is clear. He looks at the faces around him, his loyal generals, his weeping philosophers. He knows the end is here. He does not say, "You have won, Galilean." The defiance has been burned out of him. His last words are a quiet, philosophical lament, a quote from Socrates on the nature of the soul. He dies not as a soldier or an emperor, but as what he always wanted to be, a philosopher. The silence that falls in the room is absolute. But outside, in the corridors of power, a frantic, desperate scramble begins. Julian, in his obsessive focus on his grand project, had never named a successor. He has no children. He has no designated heir. His Hellenic state, a structure built entirely on his personal force of will, his intellect, and his authority, is now headless. The news of his death is kept secret for a day, then two. But secrets cannot be kept in a dying city. It leaks out, first as a whisper, then as a certainty. There is no great outpouring of grief from the populace. There is only a numb, exhausted silence, punctuated by a new and terrifying sound, the sharpening of swords within the palace walls. The generals of the Eastern army, the men who command what is left of the legions, are the only real power left. There is Nevita, the brutal butcher of Antioch, a staunch pagan. There is Victor, the commander of the Syrian front, a moderate who sees the need for compromise. There is Arinthius, another veteran of the Persian campaigns, a man of immense personal ambition. Each has his loyal troops. Each believes he is the man to save what is left of the East. The poisoned chalice has yielded its final drop. Julian's miraculous survival gave him the power to start a civil war. His ignominious death now sparks another. The victory he was granted was not a gift from the gods. It was a curse. A slow-acting poison that took 4 years to kill the man, and in the process mortally wounded the world he tried to save. His body is not yet cold, and his own faction is already preparing to tear itself apart over his inheritance. As the East descends into a bloody scramble for Julian's empty throne, you must turn your gaze back to the West. Here, the collapse is not as sudden or as dramatic. It is a slower, crumbling decay, a hollowing out of imperial authority. Emperor Valentinian still lives, a grim, aging lion holding his court in Mediolanum, but his effective power barely extends beyond the Alps. The heartland of the old empire, Italy, and the city of Rome itself, is adrift. The failure of the Annona, the endless drain of the civil war, and the debasement of the currency have rendered the imperial bureaucracy in Rome a phantom. Senators with ancient names still meet in the Curia, but their debates are meaningless. The Praetorian prefect still issues edicts, but no one has the power to enforce them. Into this vacuum of power steps an institution that has been quietly gathering strength, wealth, and, most importantly, organizational skill. The Christian Church. You are in the city of Mediolanum, not in the imperial palace, but in the residence of the bishop, a man named Ambrose. He is a formidable figure, a former provincial governor who was acclaimed bishop by the people before he was even baptized. He possesses the mind of a Roman administrator and the soul of a true believer. He sees the chaos engulfing the world not as a disaster, but as a divine opportunity. The secular empire of men is failing. It is time to build the city of God. When a bridge outside the city is washed away in a flood, the imperial engineers have no funds for repairs. It is Ambrose who organizes the collection of materials using the church's vast, tax-exempt wealth. He puts the city's stonemasons back to work, paying them in reliable silver coin from the church treasury, not Valentinian's worthless, debased currency. When a food riot breaks out in the market square, it is not the city prefect's guards who quell the violence. It is Ambrose who walks unarmed into the mob, his presence and moral authority so immense that the crowd falls silent. He then opens the church's granaries filled with grain from its vast estates and organizes an orderly distribution of bread. Ambrose is not a warlord. He is something far more powerful. He is becoming the sole source of order, of justice, of sustenance. He is the defensor civitatis, the defender of the city in fact, if not in title. The people of Mediolanum, and soon other cities in northern Italy, begin to look not to the emperor for leadership, but to their bishop. Now, travel south to the ancient, decaying heart of it all, Rome. The Bishop of Rome, a man named Damasus, is engaged in a similar, though far grander, project. The city is a powder keg of hunger and despair. The great senatorial families, who have clung to their ancestral paganism, are powerless, their wealth tied up in rural estates they can no longer effectively manage. Damasus, however, commands a vast and loyal organization. He controls the only functioning welfare system in the city, distributing food and arms to the desperate populace through the network of parish churches. He understands the power of symbols. With the imperial forums falling into disrepair, He launches a massive building program. He builds magnificent new basilicas, like St. Paul outside the walls, vast structures that dwarf the decaying pagan temples. He sends agents across the city to recover the relics of the martyrs from the catacombs, enshrining them in jeweled reliquaries. He is creating a new Christian Rome on top of the ruins of the old pagan one. But his power is not merely symbolic or charitable. The civil war has left the city's defences in a lamentable state. A raiding party of Gothic mercenaries, having broken away from Fritigern's main host, sweeps down the Italian peninsula, sacking towns and villas, meeting little resistance. They appear before the ancient Aurelian walls of Rome, not as a besieging army, but as a large, threatening band of marauders. The imperial garrison is a pathetic remnant. Valentinian can send no aid. It is Bishop Damasus who acts. He meets with the leaders of the Goths outside the city gates. He does not come as a supplicant. He comes as a prince. He brings with him wagons laden not with gold from the empty state treasury, but with the solid silver and gold plate from his churches, chalices, patens, and candlesticks. He pays the Goths a massive bribe to depart. He, the Bishop of Rome, has ransomed the city that once ruled the world. The act cements his authority. He has done what the emperor could not. He becomes the city's de facto ruler. He uses church funds to hire his own troops, not Roman legionaries, but loyal Christian mercenaries to garrison the walls and patrol the streets. These are not imperial soldiers. They are the Pope's men. This pattern is repeated across the West. In Gaul, in Hispania, wherever imperial authority has withered, it is the local bishop who steps in. These are often the only educated, literate men left in their communities. They have access to the only institutional wealth that has survived the economic collapse. They command the loyalty of the populace, a loyalty based not on fear of the sword, but on faith in God and the promise of daily bread. A new kind of power structure is being born from the ashes of the old. It is a patchwork of city-states, each ruled by a bishop-prince. Their power is local, personal, and rooted in the control of food, faith, and security. They write to each other, forming alliances, but their primary loyalty is to their own flock, their own city. The Bishop of Mediolanum, the Bishop of Rome, the Bishop of Lugdunum, these men are the new masters of the West. They are laying the foundations of a world that is no longer Roman, but something else. A fragmented, decentralized world where the Church holds both the keys to heaven and the keys to the granary. They are not rebuilding the empire. They are carving it up, transforming its ecclesiastical diocese into secular princedoms. The sword of the emperor has failed, and the shepherd's crook, now backed by bread and steel, is taking its place. You must now return to the east, to the gilded cage of the great palace in Constantinople, where the body of the Philosopher-King lies in state. The city outside is a ghost town, its silence broken only by the wails of mourners and the tramp of marching soldiers. The plague has subsided, leaving a hollowed-out, traumatized populace. But within the palace walls, a new sickness is reaching its fever pitch. The sickness of ambition. The succession crisis has become a civil war within a civil war. The unity of the Hellenic faction, already a fragile coalition of military hardliners, Neoplatonist intellectuals, and old senatorial families, shatters the moment Julian's heart stops beating. Without his singular genius and towering authority to bind them, they immediately revert to their baser instincts of rivalry and self-interest. The army is the only real power, and the army is divided. You are at a tense meeting in the Imperial Council chamber. The three most powerful generals of the Eastern Army face each other across a marble table. There is Navita, the Pannonian Pagan, a man of brutal simplicity who believes the only solution is more force. He controls the elite palace guards, the Scholae Palatini. Opposite him is Victor, the commander who fought the Sasanians in Syria. He is a pragmatist, a moderate pagan who understands that the war against the Christians is unwinnable and a compromise is necessary. His legions are still in the east, a source of power but too far away to be decisive. Between them is Arinthius, a consummate political survivor, a man whose primary faith is in his own advancement. He commands the field army of Illyricum, the battered but still formidable veterans of the Battle of the Frigidus. The debate is a farce. They speak of the stability of the state, but their eyes betray their true intentions. Nevitta argues for a continuation of Julian's policies, for a new wave of suppression against the Christians. Victor pleads for a truce, for a negotiated peace with Valentinian to face the common enemies of Persia and the Goths. Arinthius agrees with whoever seems to have the upper hand. The decision is not made in the council room. It is made in the barracks. That night, Nevitta makes his move. He leads his palace guards to the quarters of Arinthius, intending to arrest him and seize control of the Illyrian army. But Arinthius, ever the schemer, was warned. His own loyal veterans have set an ambush. The fighting erupts within the palace complex itself. A savage, confused brawl in the torchlit colonnades. Men who fought side by side against Valentinian now butcher each other for a new master. Nevitta, cornered and outmaneuvered, is cut down, his dream of a brutally pure pagan empire dying with him. Arinthius is now the master of Constantinople. He declares himself Augustus, but his victory is hollow. He holds the capital, but little else. When the news of the palace coup reaches Victor in Syria, he refuses to recognize the usurper. His legions, loyal to him and weary of the endless, pointless wars, proclaim him emperor. He is the master of Syria and Palestine. He immediately opens negotiations with the Sasanian king, Shapur II. He cedes even more territory in Mesopotamia in exchange for a peace treaty, a humiliating but necessary move to secure his rear. He knows he cannot fight a two-front war against Arinthius and the Persians. The contagion of rebellion spreads. In Egypt, the provincial governor, a staunch pagan intellectual and a close friend of Julian, hears of the chaos. He sees Nevitta's hardline faction defeated and the pragmatist Victor making peace with Persia. Fearing a future where the Hellenic cause is abandoned, he takes a fatal step. With the backing of the two legions stationed in Alexandria, he declares himself emperor, vowing to create a new, pure Hellenic kingdom in the ancient land of the pharaohs, a sanctuary for the old gods, centered on the Serapeum and the Great Library. The Eastern Roman Empire, Julian's great project, ceases to exist. In its place is a bloody patchwork of warlord states. There is the Empire of Illyricum and Thrace, ruled by the Augustus Arinthius from a starving Constantinople. There is the Empire of the East, ruled by the Augustus Victor from the wealthy city of Antioch. And there is the Hellenic Kingdom of Egypt, a desperate, idealistic rump state, under its Philosopher-King in Alexandria. This is the Eastern Dissolution. It is a rapid and catastrophic fragmentation. The great provincial armies, once the guardians of the frontiers, now turn their swords inward, carving up the empire into personal fiefdoms. The Sasanian king watches from Ctesiphon with immense satisfaction, his Roman rival having conveniently self-destructed. The Gothic warlord Frigid, facing a divided and warring collection of Roman states in the Balkans, finds himself the master of the region, his own kingdom now the most stable power between the Danube and Greece. The common people of the East are the primary victims. A farmer in Anatolia, already struggling with famine and heavy taxes, now finds himself in a war zone between the armies of Arinthius and Victor. A merchant in Damascus finds the trade routes to the sea controlled by one warlord, and the routes inland by another, each demanding ruinous tolls. The dream of a restored, unified Hellenic world has died, and in its place is a nightmare of anarchy and warlordism. The pagan cause, which Julian had so nearly resurrected, is now fatally divided, its leaders killing each other, its followers scattered and confused. The Christians of the East, particularly the militant Church of the Martyrs, see this as divine judgment. The pagans, who saw Julian's survival as a miracle, now see his death as a curse that has shattered their world into warring pieces. The chalice Julian drank from was poisoned not only for him, but for his entire cause. He united them in his life, and they fell into ruin at his death. You must now pull back your gaze, like a cartographer, drawing a new and unfamiliar map of the world. The Roman lake, the Mediterranean Sea that was once the unified heart of a single civilization, is now a fractured mosaic of fear and ambition. The great empire of Augustus and Trajan is a memory, a ghost story whispered in decaying forums. In its place, a new world of iron and faith has been born, forged in the crucible of Julian's poisoned victory. Let us survey the pieces. In the far west, you see the kingdom of Gaul. Emperor Valentinian, old and weary, has finally died, but his dynasty continues. His son Gratian, a young, vigorous and fanatically Nicene ruler, sits on the throne in Treverorum. His realm encompasses Gaul, Britain, and the loyal portions of Hispania. This is no longer the Roman Empire of the West. It is a new entity. It is a militaristic, feudal kingdom, its power based on the absolute loyalty of its Romano, Germanic army. The Frankish and Alemanni federates, now second-generation Christians, have been granted lands along the Rhine frontier, becoming a landed warrior aristocracy, the precursors to medieval knights. They are bound by oaths of personal loyalty to the king. The language of the court is still Latin, but on the streets and in the barracks, the harsh sounds of Germanic dialects are just as common. The Nicene Church is the sole unifying spiritual authority. Its bishops, the king's most trusted administrators, their power second only to the great barbarian generals. It is a hard, pious, and martial kingdom, its identity forged in the holy war against the pagan Julian. South of this kingdom lies the chaotic landscape of Italy. The city of Rome, ruled by its powerful bishop-prince, is the centre of a loose confederation of episcopal city-states that control the heart of the peninsula. They are a fragile alliance, bound by a common faith and a common fear of the chaos that surrounds them. They look to the Bishop of Rome as their leader, their papa, their father, not just in spirit, but in politics and war. This is the nascent papal state, a temporal kingdom ruled by the successor of St. Peter. Its authority derived from the control of grain, relics, and the hiring of mercenaries. Across the sea, you find the Donatist kingdom of Africa. What began as a theological uprising has become a full-fledged nation. They have crowned their own king, a fierce Numidian warlord who claims descent from the ancient enemies of Rome. Theirs is a puritanical, isolationist state, fiercely independent. Viewing the Nicene Christians of Gaul and Italy as corrupt heretics, almost as bad as the pagans, they control the grain. And this is their great weapon, which they use to maintain their independence and enrich their kingdom. Moving east, you find the ruins of Julian's dream. The Balkans are now the Aryan kingdom of the Goths. Frigid, after years of playing the Roman warlords against each other, has finally consolidated his power. From his new capital at Sirmium, he rules a vast territory from the Danube to the borders of Greece. His Gothic warriors form the ruling class, while the native Romano-Greek population are their subjects. The Arian Church, with its Gothic language Bible, is the official state religion, a symbol of their national identity, distinct from the Nicenes to the west and the chaotic mess to the east. Further east is the carcass of the Eastern Roman Empire, carved into three warring states. Arinthius, the Augustus in Constantinople, rules a beleaguered empire consisting of Thrace and western Anatolia. His is a state under perpetual siege, pressed by the Goths in the west and the rival Roman warlords in the east. His capital is a shell of its former glory, a city of ruins and ghosts. In Antioch, the Augustus Victor rules over Syria and Palestine, a wealthier but vulnerable kingdom forced to pay tribute to the resurgent Sasanian Empire to secure its eastern border. His is a state where the militant apocalyptic Church of the Martyrs is gaining immense power, challenging his own authority. And in Alexandria, the last flickering flame of Julian's visions survives in the Hellenic kingdom of Egypt. It is a strange, scholastic kingdom, a fortress of the old gods and classical philosophy, ruled by a dynasty of philosopher-kings. It survives only because it is geographically isolated and controls the immense wealth of the Nile. It is a living museum, a relic of a dead world, surrounded by enemies on all sides. This, then, is the new map of the world in the year 380. The unified Roman Empire is gone, shattered into a collection of successor states, each defined by a specific fusion of ethnicity, military power, and a particular brand of faith. A Nicene Romano-Germanic kingdom in Gaul, an episcopal confederation in Italy, a Donatist kingdom in Africa, an Arian kingdom in the Balkans, and three warring pagan and Christian rump states in the east. The concept of Roman as a universal identity is dead. Now, a person is a Nicene Gallic, an Arian Goth, a Donatist African, a Hellenic Egyptian. The great unifying sea has become a barrier. Trade has collapsed, replaced by piracy and intermittent warfare. The great roads are unsafe, the aqueducts are crumbling. The world is smaller, more dangerous, more fiercely divided by walls of faith and steel than at any time in the last 500 years. This is the ultimate legacy of the poisoned chalice. Julian's survival, his great victory, did not lead to a restored Hellenic age. It led to the utter and permanent destruction of the world he loved. He did not want to destroy the Roman Empire. He wanted to save it. But by forcing a single, violent, ideological confrontation, he shattered it so completely that it could never be put back together again. The unity he broke is gone forever, replaced by a world of kingdoms, of iron, and of faith. In the long twilight of a broken world, the final act of the tragedy is not a great battle between armies, but a quiet, desperate act of cultural suicide. It is the story of two libraries, burned decades apart, one by a pagan mob, the other by a Christian army, bookending the age of religious fury that Julian's survival unleashed. They are the twin pyres on which the classical world is immolated. Your journey begins in the past, in the early days of the chaos. You are in Antioch, under the rule of the Augustus Victor. The city is a hotbed of the militant Christian sect, the Vindicators, who see the pagan rump states as a demonic infestation that must be purged. Their leader is a charismatic, fiery preacher named Cyril, a man who believes that the wisdom of the Greeks is the honeyed poison of the serpent. He preaches that the great library of Antioch, filled with the works of pagan poets, philosophers, and scientists, is a temple of demons, a source of the spiritual corruption that has plagued their land. One night, his followers, their passions inflamed by his rhetoric, take matters into their own hands. A mob, carrying torches and axes, descends on the library. They are not scholars. They are the poor, the desperate, the true believers, convinced they are doing God's work. The small garrison of Victor's soldiers is overwhelmed. You watch in horror as the great doors are splintered open. The mob pours inside, their torches casting dancing, monstrous shadows on the walls lined with countless scrolls and codices. They do not read the titles, they see only heresy. They tear the scrolls from their shelves, ripping the delicate papyrus, smashing the wooden codices. They pile them in the central courtyard, the comedies of Aristophanes, the histories of Thucydides, the atomic theories of Democritus, the medical treatises of Galen, all fuel for a single colossal bonfire. The accumulated knowledge of 1,000 years of Hellenic civilization goes up in smoke, a sacrifice to the new, intolerant god of the Vindicators. The Augustus Victor, needing the support of the militant Christians against his rivals, issues a weak condemnation but does nothing to punish the perpetrators. The precedent is set. Now, decades later, you must travel to the heart of the other half of the pagan world, to the Hellenic kingdom of Egypt. Alexandria is the last sanctuary of the old ways, a city where the flame of classical learning has been carefully guarded. But it is a city under siege. To the north, the sea is prowled by pirates. To the east and west, the desert is controlled by hostile Christian tribes. The final blow comes not from a foreign enemy, but from within the fractured Roman world itself. The Aryan kingdom of the Goths, now a major power under a new ambitious king, launches a great expedition. They are not interested in the theology of their Nicene or pagan neighbours. They are interested in wealth. Alexandria is the richest prize in the Mediterranean, and the Goths are hungry. A Gothic fleet, built in the captured shipyards of Greece, lands an army near the city. The small, scholarly army of the Hellenic kingdom is no match for the tens of thousands of Gothic warriors. The city falls after a brief, brutal siege. The Goths are not interested in burning books. They are interested in gold, silver, and slaves. They loot the city for a week, a whirlwind of avarice and destruction. But among their army are Nicene priests, missionaries from the West, who see the Goths as a tool for God's work, a hammer to smash the last bastion of pagan idolatry. It is these priests who lead a mob of local Coptic Christians, long oppressed by the pagan rulers, to the greatest library in the world, the Maution, the intellectual heart of the Hellenic kingdom. This is not just a library. It is a university, an academy, the heir to the legacy of the original great library of Alexandria. You are there as the scene from Antioch replays itself, but on an even grander, more tragic scale. The Gothic soldiers, indifferent at first, are paid by the priests with chalices looted from the pagan temples. They form a cordon, holding back the city's horrified scholars, while the mob does its work. The contents of this library are the sum of human knowledge, the complete, original works of the great Athenian tragedians, the lost books of Livy's History of Rome, the astronomical charts of Hipparchus, which mapped the heavens, the engineering manuals of Heron, with their designs for steam engines and automata, works of medicine, mathematics, and philosophy that the world will not see again for another 1,000 years, if ever. It all burns. The fire is so large it can be seen for miles out to sea. It burns for 3 days. With the smoke, a great light is extinguished from the world. The destruction is not just an act of war, it is a statement. It is the final, definitive rejection of the classical past. The tragedy is not just the loss of knowledge, it is the symmetry. In Antioch, a Christian library was once destroyed by a pagan mob at Julian's instigation. Now, the last great pagan library is destroyed by a Christian mob enabled by a Christian army. The cycle of religious hatred, the fire that Julian stoked with his poisoned chalice, has consumed everything. It has burned the bridge to the past. The world is now left with only fragments. A few scattered copies of the classics will survive in the monasteries of the West, a few more translated into Syriac and Arabic in the East. But the great, interconnected body of classical thought is gone. The world is poorer, darker, more ignorant. The long sunset has turned to night. The mutual self-destruction is complete. This is the final payment, rendered in full, for the poisoned chalice of Julian's victory. The chosen archetype for this history was the poisoned chalice. A great victory creates new, unsolvable problems that lead to ruin. Julian's miraculous survival on the plains of Persia was the victory, the divine sign that empowered him to launch his great restoration. It was a chalice filled with the promise of a world returned to reason, philosophy, and the bright gods of Olympus. But the drink was poison. The very act of forcing a monolithic, state-sponsored Hellenism onto a deeply Christianized empire was the insoluble problem. It did not heal the empire's divisions. It weaponized them, transforming theological disputes into total war. What was the trade-off? The world of our timeline, where a triumphant, unified Christianity presided over the slow decay of the Western Empire, was avoided. But in its place came something far worse: a rapid, violent, and total collapse of the entire Roman world, East and West. Unity was traded for anarchy. A long, slow sunset was traded for a sudden, catastrophic night. The dark ages of this timeline are deeper, more fragmented, and more poisoned by endemic religious hatred than our own. The successor kingdoms are not the inheritors of the Roman legacy. They are its bitter, feuding grave robbers, each clinging to a shard of the shattered mirror. The great question this timeline leaves us with is a haunting one. Is a world destroyed by a fight over the nature of God preferable to one that slowly forgets its own name? The fire that burned the last library in Alexandria offers no answer. Only the cold, silent ash of a world that chose certainty over wisdom, and in so doing, lost both.